The heavy wooden door slammed shut in my face with a sound that echoed through my soul. My name is Sarah, and I'm 28 years old, standing on my uncle's porch with tears already forming in my eyes. Through the frosted glass, I could see the warm glow of lights and hear the laughter of my family inside. "You're not welcome here anymore," Uncle Robert had said just moments before, his voice cold as winter stone. "Not after what you did to this family." What I did. My hands trembled as I clutched the apple pie I had baked that morning, hoping to bring some sweetness to our annual Christmas gathering. The same gathering I had attended every year since I was born. The same uncle who used to lift me onto his shoulders when I was 6 years old. Behind that door sat my cousins, my aunts, my grandmother who was now 83 and might not have many more Christmases left. They were all there, sharing stories and passing around photo albums, while I stood alone in the December cold. The worst part wasn't the rejection itself. It was knowing that half of them probably agreed with Uncle Robert's decision. The whispers had started 3 months ago when I made the choice that split our family down the middle. Some called it brave. Others called it betrayal. I could hear my cousin Tommy's laugh through the walls. The same Tommy who hadn't spoken to me since I presented my findings to the family. His anger burned deeper than anyone else's because what I had discovered directly involved his future, his education, his family's financial security. Standing there on that porch, I remembered all the Christmas mornings we had shared in that house. Uncle Robert teaching me to ride a bike in his driveway. Aunt Linda braiding my hair when my mother was too busy. The birthday parties, graduation celebrations, and Sunday dinners that had formed the foundation of my childhood. All of it felt like it was crumbling because I had chosen truth over peace. I walked back to my car, my breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. As I sat behind the steering wheel, still holding that untouched pie, I wondered how everything had gone so wrong so fast. 6 months ago, we were a normal, happy family. Now I felt like an outsider looking in at the life I used to know. The questions haunted me as I drove home to my empty apartment. How do you forgive someone who cuts you out of the only family you've ever known? How do you move forward when the people you love most refuse to even look at you? I had no idea that God was already preparing an answer that would change everything. 3 months earlier, I sat in my childhood bedroom, staring at the letter that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my family. The return address showed a law office I had never heard of, and the contents made my stomach drop to the floor. My father had been dead for 15 years, killed in a car accident when I was just 13. But this letter contained information that painted a completely different picture of the man I had mourned and idealized all these years. According to the legal documents, my father had been involved in something that hurt Uncle Robert's family financially just before he died. Money that was supposed to help my cousin Tommy go to college. Money that was supposed to pay for my aunt's medical treatments. Money that simply disappeared. The letter came from Tommy's lawyer, now that he was an adult. He wanted answers, and he wanted justice for what my father had allegedly done to his family. But here's what made everything complicated. I didn't believe it was true. I had spent countless hours going through my father's old papers, talking to his friends, and trying to piece together the truth. Everything I found pointed to my father being innocent of what they accused him of. In fact, I discovered evidence that suggested someone else in the family might have been responsible. That someone else was Uncle Robert himself. The evidence wasn't complete, but it was strong enough to make me question everything. Bank statements that didn't match up. Signatures that looked suspicious. Timing that seemed too convenient. I faced an impossible choice. Stay quiet and let my father's memory be destroyed, or speak up and potentially tear apart the only family I had left. When I finally decided to share my findings with the family, hoping we could work through this together, Uncle Robert's reaction was swift and brutal. He accused me of trying to destroy his reputation to protect my father's legacy. He called me a liar and manipulator who would say anything to avoid the truth. By the time I arrived at that Christmas gathering, battle lines had already been drawn. Some family members believed me. Others stood firmly with Uncle Robert. And now I was standing outside in the cold, wondering if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. The days following that Christmas rejection felt like walking through thick mud. Every step forward seemed impossible. Every breath felt heavy with the weight of what I carried. I couldn't stop thinking about my grandmother's face in the window as Uncle Robert turned me away. She had looked confused and hurt, probably wondering why her granddaughter wasn't coming inside to share Christmas dinner like every year before. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from family members. Some were supportive, like my cousin Lisa, who wrote, "I believe you, Sarah. Don't give up." Others were harsh, telling me I should apologize and stop causing trouble. But the message that hurt most came from my Aunt Martha, my father's sister. "Your father would be ashamed of what you're doing to this family, would he?" I sat in my living room that night, looking at the old photo of him and me at my high school graduation. His arm was around my shoulders, and he was smiling with such pride. Had I honored his memory, or had I destroyed it by digging up the past? Sleep became impossible. I would lie awake replaying every conversation, every family gathering where someone had made a comment about my father's mistakes. All those years, they had been talking about something that wasn't even true. How many times had I defended him without knowing what I was defending him against? The worst part was the isolation. Christmas had always been our biggest family celebration, and now I felt like I was watching from outside a window, seeing the life I used to be part of but could no longer access. Even going to the grocery store became difficult because I might run into a family member who would either ignore me completely or lecture me about causing trouble. My faith felt shaky for the first time in years. Where was God in all this mess? I had been raised to believe that truth would set you free, but this truth felt like it was destroying everything I held dear. The evidence I had found wasn't going away, though. Every time I looked at those bank statements and documents, the truth seemed clearer. Someone had taken that money, and it wasn't my father. But proving it meant potentially destroying Uncle Robert's life, and he had a wife, children, and grandchildren who would all suffer for his mistakes. The internal battle was exhausting. Part of me wanted to just burn all the documents and pretend I had never found them. My father was already gone. Would clearing his name really change anything? But then I would think about Tommy, who had spent 15 years believing his uncle was a thief, and my heart would break all over again. I started praying more than I ever had before, begging God for wisdom. "Show me what to do," I whispered night after night. "Show me how to handle this truth that's too heavy for me to carry alone." The answer didn't come in the way I expected. One evening, as I was reading my Bible and crying again, I came across a verse in Matthew. "Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Was this persecution? Was standing up for my father's innocence really about righteousness? Or was I just being stubborn and proud? Then I read another verse. "If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault, just between the two of you." I realized I had never actually spoken to Uncle Robert directly about what I had found. I had shared my discoveries with the family, but I had never sat down with him one-on-one to give him a chance to explain or make things right. Maybe it wasn't too late to handle this the way God intended. Finding Uncle Robert alone was harder than I expected. After that Christmas confrontation, he seemed to avoid being anywhere I might show up. But I knew his routine well enough to catch him at the hardware store where he bought supplies for his weekend projects. When he saw me walking toward him in the paint aisle, his face hardened like concrete. "Sarah, I told you we have nothing to discuss. Uncle Robert, please, just give me 5 minutes. Not as someone who's trying to hurt you, but as your niece who has always loved and respected you." Something in my voice must have reached him because he stopped walking away. We stood there between cans of primer and brushes while I pulled out the folder I had been carrying everywhere for weeks. "I need to show you what I found," I said quietly, "and I need to give you a chance to explain it before anyone else sees it." For the next 20 minutes, I walked him through everything. The bank statements, the timing of transfers, the signatures that didn't match my father's handwriting. With each piece of evidence, his face grew paler. His hands started shaking as he looked at a bank statement dated just 2 days before my father's accident. "Where did you get this?" he whispered. "Dad kept copies of everything in his home office. I found them when I was going through his papers, trying to prove his innocence." I watched as recognition dawned in his eyes. This shows a transfer that happened after he was supposed to have taken the money. The handwriting doesn't match his signature on any other document. Uncle Robert sat down on a stack of paint cans, looking older than I had ever seen him. For several minutes, he just stared at the papers, his breathing heavy and labored. "Your father was going to expose me," he said so quietly I almost didn't hear him. "He found out what I had done, and he was going to tell everyone. The money was already gone. I had gambling debts I couldn't pay. I was going to lose my house, my family's respect, everything." My heart pounded as he continued. "When he died in that accident, I thought maybe God was giving me a second chance. I could blame him for the missing money, and no one would ever know the truth. I never expected Tommy to hire a lawyer 15 years later." Standing there in that hardware store, I felt a mixture of relief and heartbreak. Relief that my father's innocence was confirmed, but heartbreak at seeing my uncle, a man I had looked up to for years, crumble before my eyes. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, looking up at me with tears in his eyes. It was the question I had been dreading and hoping for at the same time. I had the power to destroy him or save him. I could demand he confess everything to the family, or I could walk away and pretend this conversation never happened. But before I could answer, he said something that changed everything. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry for what I did to your father's memory. And I'm sorry for shutting you out when you were just trying to find the truth." In that moment, I understood what God had been preparing me for all along. Forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a choice. That's what my pastor had always said, but I never understood what he meant until I stood in that hardware store, looking at my uncle's broken face. Every part of me wanted to stay angry. He had let my father take the blame for 15 years. He had turned the family against me when I got too close to the truth. He had slammed the door in my face at Christmas and made me feel like an orphan in my own family. But looking at him sitting there, shoulders shaking with sobs, I realized that anger was just another prison. He was already trapped by his guilt and shame. Did I want to be trapped by my bitterness? "Uncle Robert," I said, sitting down on a paint can next to him, "I forgive you." He looked at me like I had spoken in a foreign language. "How can you say that, after everything I've done?" "Because holding on to this anger is killing me," I said, "and because my father would want me to choose love over revenge." We sat there in silence for several minutes while other customers walked around us, probably wondering why two people were having an emotional breakdown in the paint section. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now you get to choose what kind of man you want to be for the rest of your life," I said. "You can keep living this lie, or you can find the courage to make things right." Over the next few days, Uncle Robert and I met several times to talk through what making things right would look like. He was terrified of losing his family's respect, but he was also exhausted from carrying this secret for so many years. "I want to tell them the truth," he said during our third conversation, "but I'm scared they'll never forgive me." "They might not," I said honestly, "but living a lie isn't really living at all." By the way, as I share this story with you, I'm curious, where are you listening from right now, and what time is it where you are? Sometimes these quiet moments of reflection happen at the most unexpected times of day. The plan we developed was simple but terrifying. Uncle Robert would call a family meeting and confess everything. He would apologize to Tommy and offer to find a way to make financial amends, even if it took years. And he would ask for their forgiveness, knowing he might not receive it. But first, he had one more thing he needed to do, something that would test whether my own forgiveness was real or just words. 2 days before the planned family meeting, my phone rang at 6 in the morning. Uncle Robert's voice was shaky and desperate. "Sarah, I need your help. I can't do this alone." He was supposed to drive to Tommy's house that morning to have a private conversation before addressing the whole family. But panic had set in and he was falling apart. "I'll lose everything," he kept saying. "My wife, my kids, my grandchildren. They'll all hate me." Part of me wanted to let him suffer. After all, he had made his choices 15 years ago and again when he turned me away at Christmas. But forgiveness isn't a one-time decision. It's something you have to choose over and over again. "I'll come with you," I heard myself saying. We'll face this together. The drive to Tommy's house was quiet except for Uncle Robert's nervous breathing. When we arrived, Tommy opened the door with a confused look, clearly not expecting to see both of us. "We need to talk," Uncle Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. For the next hour, I watched my uncle tell the hardest truth of his life. Tommy's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, hurt, and finally something that looked like understanding. "All these years," Tommy said, "I thought Sarah's father was a thief. I hated him. I hated her by association." "Your father was a good man," Uncle Robert said through tears. "He was going to help me figure out how to pay back the money and come clean to the family. He died before we could make it right." Tommy looked at me with new eyes. "You knew, didn't you? That's why you were asking all those questions 3 months ago." I nodded. "I found evidence that suggested my father was innocent, but I needed to know the truth before I accused anyone." "And you still came here with him today?" Tommy asked. "After everything he put you through?" "Because forgiveness isn't about what people deserve," I said. "It's about what we choose to do with our pain." Tommy was quiet for a long time. Then he did something that surprised all of us. He reached out and shook Uncle Robert's hand. "Thank you for finally telling me the truth," he said. "It doesn't undo 15 years of believing a lie about Sarah's father, but it's a start." As we prepared to leave, Tommy asked, "What made you decide to confess now?" Uncle Robert looked at me. "Because she showed me what real grace looks like. And I realized I wanted to be worthy of that grace." The family meeting 2 days later was one of the hardest things I've ever witnessed. Uncle Robert stood in his own living room, facing his wife, children, and extended family, and told them the truth about what he had done. The reactions were everything he had feared and more. Aunt Linda ran out of the room crying. His son Mark shouted and called him a coward. Several family members left without saying a word. But some stayed, some listened, and slowly, over the following weeks and months, the healing began. It wasn't easy or quick. There were angry phone calls, tense conversations, and family members who chose sides. Uncle Robert entered counseling and started attending Gamblers Anonymous meetings. He got a second job to begin paying back the money he had stolen all those years ago. The hardest part for me was watching the ripple effects of truth. My grandmother, bless her heart, struggled to understand why her son had lied for so many years. She would call me crying, saying she didn't know what to believe anymore. Tommy's relationship with his father became strained as he processed 15 years of misdirected anger toward my dad. But there were unexpected moments of grace too. Aunt Martha, who had sent me that harsh message about my father being ashamed, showed up at my apartment one evening with tears in her eyes. "I owe you the biggest apology of my life," she said. "You were protecting your father's honor when I should have been." Some family members surprised me with their capacity for forgiveness, while others I had expected support from remained distant. Cousin Lisa became my closest ally, often calling to check on me during the difficult months of family reconstruction. 3 months after that family meeting, I received an unexpected phone call. "Sarah, it was Uncle Robert. Linda and I would like to invite you over for dinner this Sunday, if you're willing." When I arrived at their house that Sunday, Uncle Robert met me at the door, the same door he had slammed in my face just months before. This time he opened it wide. "Welcome home," he said, and I could see he meant it. Dinner wasn't perfect. There were awkward moments and careful conversations. But there was also laughter, shared memories, and something that felt like the beginning of a new kind of family relationship. As I was leaving that evening, Uncle Robert walked me to my car. "I still don't understand how you were able to forgive me," he said. "Because I learned that forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you," I said. "It's about freeing yourself from the prison of bitterness. And sometimes, when you choose to forgive, you give the other person permission to become who they were always meant to be." Not everyone in our family has found their way to forgiveness yet. Some relationships are still broken, maybe permanently. But I've learned that you can't control other people's choices, you can only control your own. Today, Uncle Robert and I have coffee together once a month. We talk about life, faith, and the long journey of making amends. He's still working to rebuild trust with his family, and some days are harder than others. But the door is open now, and sometimes that's all grace needs to begin its work. God didn't teach me to forgive by making my uncle easy to forgive. He taught me by showing me that forgiveness is the key that unlocks the prison we build around our own hearts. When we choose to forgive, we don't just free the person who hurt us, we free ourselves to love again. What do you think about this story of forgiveness and family healing? Have you ever faced a situation where choosing forgiveness felt impossible but necessary?